And can I just ask, this is how long have you played Warhammer in general?
Since I was in fifth grade, so over 20 years. I started playing with 40K at the start of fourth edition.
Okay.
So it was like 98,
Okay.
I think.
Sounds roughly around when I started. 97 is about where I roughly placed. Would have been about sixth grade.
Yep.
So that make me a little bit older than you. 30. I'm 35, going on
Yep.
36.
I'm 32, so
Yeah. Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. So I started playing around sixth, seventh grade. That tracks. Yeah. That's about right. We started right about the same time. So you started with 40K.
Yep.
When did you jump to Fantasy Battle, or did you stay 40K all the way to AOS?
No, I did. I was 40K for a bit, and then like a year and a half later, I got into fantasy as well. I had a friend that wanted to play fantasy, so I played that. But I also liked 40K, so I kind of played both at the same time. So
Oh.
and then we had uh, growing up, we had a group of people that I were like on my street where we all played Warhammer, and we both played fantasy and 40K. And I don't really know, but like every 6 months or so, the club would just kind of switch, and we'd start playing fantasy again, or we'd start playing 40K again. And
Yeah.
we had like an orc player, we had a high elf player, we had an empire player. I played undead, well, I guess vampire counts at the
Now.
time, right? Yeah. And then dark elves when they were absolutely terrible. But I played the most annoying dark elf list possible of just all little 5 and 10 man units of just like going all at angles. It's terrible.
Oh yeah,
People
man.
hated me. Just fast cavalry all over the place. It was a pain.
When they were still called Cold One Riders and they had the
Yep.
stupidity rule where like they just wouldn't do anything.
Oh, I ended up hating those things because they would fail their stupidity checks right when they were all lined up for their charge. I'd have 5 of them and like a lord in there. Like, all right, great. My hammer's coming down, and then they'd fail their stupidity check, and I'd just be like, well, that's that. Guess I'm stuck.
See, I started with Warhammer Fantasy Battle right as like so it was Army Book Undead, and then like the vampire counts came as I was building that change came as I was building
Sure,
my
yeah.
army. Um, I was terrible at Warhammer Fantasy Battle, like stuff like jumping, guessing distances, and no pre-measuring and things
That
that
game is hard. It is a
space
hard game.
like the spatial awareness of that game
So hard.
is
Well, the
like
angles of every unit too, trying to figure out how do you want to place your block. Does it face 40 degrees to the left or 45 degrees? Like, I mean, it's a huge deal.
paying movement for wheeling. You're now doing geometry to wheel your cavalry.
Yep.
Like just it was stuff that like you're talking about a middle schooler. I mean that was hard. Those were hard concepts for me to like grasp, even though I was very smart, analytical. I was in the I'm that kid who would go on to be the honor student, AP student, nerd by all measures, right? And even then, I'm like, when I switched over to 40K in about high school, uh, more college. I started
Mm-hmm.
collecting blood angels in about high school, but I didn't really have anything substantial until I went to college. I was a much better player of 40K. There's something about that skirmish nature,
Yeah.
it made it easier. Like, yeah, you still had scatter dice and templates and
Yep.
some of those other things. And so when AOS happened, I'm like, they took the thing I liked the most about 40K, which was like essentially what they called skirmishing units in Warhammer Fantasy Battle, like Goblin Fanatics were skirmishing units. They didn't have to keep
Yep.
cohesion, right? They took that skirmishing stuff, and then they said like, okay, now you just have like, coherent unit coherency.
Yep.
I'm like, yes, I am going
Do
to
what
have
you
fun.
want.
I'm going to have all the fun ever. I see chat gang already showing up. Kicker saying, good evening. Lion Nerd, how's it going? I am, of course, the magical Mr. Mephisto, the most dangerous man in Age of Sigmar, and you are watching AOS RantCast 86. Going to be talking about Daughters of Khaine tournament preparation and Age of Sigmar Worlds, the event formerly known as ETC. Tonight, my guest is Jake. And Jake, I gotta finally ask, how do I pronounce your last name, man?
Look here.
Liqueur. Like, so you're like liqueur for for the
Yep.
Warhammer, what ails you? Like, you got liqueur.
Yep. Exactly. Or could it be, you're mixing a drink, you need a good liqueur in it,
All right, all right.
Either way, you can go either angle.
Like I want to ask, is it French? Like, is it a French, or it could be like Latin?
Yeah, it's I guess it's French Canadian and then French before that. So
Right,
yeah,
right on.
yeah.
And real our guest tonight. Many of you know to dread him and fear him in the Midwest. For some of you, you may not have learned, but you are from the Detroit Warhammer Club. Tharby monsters here in the Midwest. They're all from Detroit. terrors in the top tables, and a pretty. I mean, you're mentioning kind of on the off show that you play a lot of different armies, but my sort of meeting of you is very much Daughters of Khaine. Like you had these awesome Spartan conversions for your DOK, and you pretty much have the triple crown: sports, hobby, and GT wins with them all. So like just
Yep.
across the board. So we're gonna talk a little bit of DOK from an expert, plus whatever else we land upon. Sound great, man?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it. All right. So just real quick about how like when did you jump in on Daughters of Khaine and why did you jump in on Daughters of Khaine? Because like I said, I mean the time is weird to me. I lost a whole year, but right when I was getting into the tournament scene, I think maybe I don't think you were at Dragonfall. It probably wouldn't have been until the following year at Adepticon. I think I probably saw your
Yeah,
DOK for the
I
first time.
took it to I took Daughters of Khaine to Adepticon. It would have been 2018, I think.
Yeah, I think that would
2019. It was the spring it was like the spring after they had come out.
right.
And I only had 1,000 points of them ready.
Yeah.
I took Nagash and Grimghast to the main event.
Yeah.
But I took the daughters that had converted up to the 1,000 point event.
Right on. And then I think Midwest Meltdown the year prior to that, it was you were I think you're in the photo with a Nagash, right?
Yep. Yep. That was when we all brought Nagash, and that got the spell portal FAQ'd pretty darn fast. Broke that in a weekend.
Yeah. It was Martin Orlando. It was 2019, and it was on a gold shield, right? Your display board is this golden shield. So, yeah, and then I think NashCon, you took him there. You won NashCon.
Yep. Sure did.
So congrats! You got the sweet sword trophy. That is one of the most coveted pieces of hardware I think in our tournament scene.
Probably my favorite trophy for sure.
And so just been kind of like a tearing up with Daughters of Khaine. We got a new book coming out, and I'll get your thoughts on what the future holds for you and Daughters of Khaine a little bit later. But what you read on the new book, the good, the bad, what's interesting?
I mean, it's a lot more wide open than the last book. I feel like the last book, it was, to me at least, and keep in mind I'm looking at it from a cutting edge competitive perspective. So if you're looking just to kind of have fun with the book and go play, Tuesday night Warhammer, Wednesday night Warhammer, Garage Hammer, and stuff like that, this take is not necessarily that. But if you want to take an army to potentially win 5 or 6 games at a tournament, I mean, the last book, it was going to be Hagnar, or maybe if you were really off the wall, you could do the Calibron build. But there wasn't a whole lot of other options in it. Mm-hmm. It was very good at what it did. It could be very durable, very fast, a lot of damage as well, which is pretty incredible to have all of that. Mm-hmm. The new book with all the new temples really, really opens up. Yeah. It's not to say that Hagnar isn't still great. It is. Its powers come down a little bit, though, with the Holy Within bubble and losing its reroll all hits. That changed it a little bit. And then you had other temples pop up, Drycheek and F looking great with charge, but even the Kraith up there.
Yeah, Scott.
Fight again. Yeah, that's pretty fun just to roll the dice and see if you fight again. I mean, it's a third of the time. That's gonna happen. Yeah. Chuck Moore's
Kraith. And they're on Sisters of Slaughter, and I was just looking at JP Janice's Listbot. And the efficiency of Sisters of Slaughter, brilliant points efficiency on those. So 180% points efficiency, something like that.
Yeah, I mean anything that can activate from 6 inches out just has so much flexibility. That unit is incredible. You can retreat and quote unquote charge. You're not charging. You're just retreating, running, and then piling into another unit. But it doesn't say you can't do that. So you can effectively retreat and charge so long as you can get within 6.
Right.
If somebody tags your unit, you can pile the whole unit in, so it makes it a great defensive buff. They end up being a huge problem.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're really seeing the evolution of table play in Age of Sigmar as we've moved. Shooting has forced us a little bit more towards MSU, and really the movement phase and movement I think is one of the most important parts of Age of Sigmar, and they just got they've got a teleport. They've got a teleport sub allegiance. They've got
Hmm.
just on the war scroll pile in shenanigans, and then you got retreat and charge. Like they're bringing a lot of movement tech,
Yep.
which that on its surface value is like highly valued. But then they also bring the damage to get people off of the spots they want to be on, which is really
Yep.
where the book becomes winning and not just cheeky, right?
Yep.
Like,
Well, they have deep striking too. So they have harpies. Both
right,
are well-known units for deep striking. One can shoot and then move when it comes down, which is fantastic. The other unit is part of a battalion that gets +1 to charge. You can reroll charge rolls of a 1 on turn 2 onwards. So that unit has a very reliable charge. At 9 inches, you got an 8 on the dice with rerollable ones. Not too bad. And then they also have the Shadow Stalkers, which are just an unbelievable unit.
I can't believe that scroll is
They're so good.
Yeah, I can't believe that. What 100 points? I looked at those and I'm like,
they do so much for 100 points.
it's crazy because like getting the Daughters of Khaine perspective, I'm like I play very much kind of stick to like my death armies, a couple chaos armies now.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I would auto for 100 points. I would auto include those in most of my list builds, and I'm talking to DOK players, and they're like, yeah, like it's hard to like take them over other stuff. I'm like, that's the bar. Like it's so like there's such good efficient uses of your points in that book that like you look at something like that like I would kill for in like Ossiarch Bone Reapers and like.
Well, the thing is that's internal book balance, though, right?
Right.
Because Reapers have durability that other books beg for. I mean, look at the catapult for Reapers. It's a mind blowing piece of artillery that other books would beg for.
Right.
But that is where you get the internal balance of a book. There's some of these scrolls and daughters that are just unbelievable. Doomfire Warlocks are one of them.
Yeah.
On paper, just straight up, that is an incredible scroll. But I still don't think you're going to see it in that many armies. Not because they're bad. They're not bad. They just don't fit what the army tries to do.
Right.
But it's an amazing scroll.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any bad scrolls in that book.
Yeah. Yeah, even the like some of the like the worst scrolls are significant buff pieces, so you're penalized for that force multiplier a little bit, but they bring such a good force multiplication or good utility to the field. I'm thinking about one of the cauldron witches. I'm like yeah, kind of don't want this, but like the buff it's bringing, the force multiplication, and in some of the builds where it really enables and really turns itself on with some bonuses, it's you're like, yeah, this is great. I mean, one of the takes I see on the internet is like they're complaining that the book is too good, and I'm just like, and I'm a pessimist in most of my life, but I'm an optimist when it comes to things I love. I'm like, no, you don't understand. I wish everything was this good. Like I don't view that as a bad thing. I want everything to be to this level. Like this is, like if Beast of Chaos gets a second tome and they show as much care in a second Beast of Chaos tome as they did this sort of second DOK tome, you're just like, yeah, like we're gonna throw a ticker tape parade. All the Bray herds will be roving the okay, so maybe don't make it that good because you don't want to stack, you don't want all the Beast of Chaos furries out, in your tournaments. But the point is I think it's a really good. I think they should really look at what they did right here going forward. The joke is that Daughters of Khaine was sort of like the beta 2.0 book.
Mm-hmm.
If this is the beta 3.0 book for AOS, I think we're in a good place.
Yeah, so. It should be interesting. I mean, it's a very balanced book in that it has everything in it. It's going to be able to play no matter what the meta is. It has shooting, it has movement, it has durability, it has damage, it has Marathi, she's just her own thing. It has ridiculous combos if you want to do that. It has hordes of infantry if you want to do that. You can go elite, you can go hero hammer. There's a lot of options in it. In a way, the way the new Daughters book is built, it reminds me a lot of Skaven. Mm-hmm. Skaven has a lot more scrolls and a lot more options, but that book will play no matter what the meta is and will always have something that's good. Daughters, I think, will be the same case. And right now, I think the points are a great value. Even if the points go up, there's still going to be something that is left at its current points or even comes down that will be highly valuable.
Yeah. I mean that's. I think about like we kind of you're very much taking this from the competitive angle, so I'm gonna play the sort of casual angle for our dynamic of the episode. But I think about like a new player. My money is precious, my time is precious. Yep. I'm sitting there thinking about trying to get in on a book. Those toolbox style armies, Cities of Sigmar, you mentioned Skaven. This book going forward, that's pretty comforting. If I look at this book with a lot of options, I go, look at this. Even if my points get hammered or like they go down a little bit, it's got such good war scrolls, and good sort of like internal parity with a lot of options, from sub-faction to sub-faction, that
Yep.
I can really feel confident buying this army, and in a year from now, if they get looked at twice in the big winter FAQ and maybe a GHB and stuff, I can still feel pretty confident that I'm going to be able to field something, one close to how I want to play. I don't want to be like super techy and like doing pile-in shenanigans. Maybe I do want to like play more classically, screaming across the table, get in your face. Oh, Hagnar, yeah, hello,
Sure.
how do you do? Like, I think that that's a really good thing for a new player or a casual player, like where you get this, you can buy a book and be confident that your army is going to be similar going forward. If you mentioned Ossiarch Bone Reapers, you know, I'm not even going to talk about Petrifex Elite for a while. One of our greatest tools is that artillery piece. If that artillery piece kind of like falls out of the book competitively speaking, you're just looking at your book going, oh no, oh no. Like, I hope they bring some other stuff down now, right? Like,
Hmm.
there's, other armies have that same vibe where you're looking at it and you go, okay, if they change this, what's my army look like? And
Yep.
is it shelved here now? Like, oh no. Like,
Yep.
that's a precarious situation to be in. I don't
Yeah.
so and Daughters of Khaine not in that position.
There's no kit that you could buy with Daughters and be unhappy with it on the table, in
Right.
my opinion. I think every kit there is going to be useful, no matter how you build it. There's no kit that you buy, put it on the table, and realize this is a waste of 120 points or 200 points or whatever.
Or $60 or $100. Like, you
Yeah,
think about
exactly.
the
Yeah,
monetary side of it.
it's our was it almost 200 for Marathi? I don't even know what she's at now. Like with the GW price hikes, it's pretty wild. But yeah, it's great to see there's nothing that's wasted in the book.
Right on, right on. Real quick, G-Dad dropping a tier 1 sub for 14 years of supporting me in AOS RantCast. So thank you so much there, my friend. Lionerd, little old, little new Lionerd supporting me for 2 years. Thank you so much for that tier 1 sub. And Martin Orlando dropping 1,000 RDP to remind everyone that Chat Gang ain't nothing to mess with. And then receiving a gift sub from G-Deb. So enjoy the emotes there, Martin Orlando. Go out and cross pollinate all of the various channels across the world and be sure to spam my Nagash emotes. And be sure that people get the pronunciation correct when you do it. Mars dropping 5 tier 1 gift subs to the channel. Thank you so much, my friend. There we go. Cheers. Yeah, so I like the DOK book. I feel that there's some people looking at it with some envy. I get that feeling. I truly, truly, truly do. I too wish OBR were dominant and the terror they deserve to be, and everyone feared me just walking up to the table again. But yeah, no, I think it's really cool. I think of it from the perspective of somebody who wants to play this, someone who wants to get in the army, and it makes me happy.
Yeah, they're good.
So I guess I kind of skipped over the question I asked earlier. What got you interested in DOK in the first place? Was it like the pure competitive edge, or not pure competitive edge? Was it the purely competitive choice, or was there something like I've got 2 armies sitting here, these are both going to be pretty competitive, I'm going to go with this one instead? Was there something that gravitated you towards DOK?
Um, Way back when I got started with Warhammer, I was a Dark Elf player. Back in the early 2000s. So I love Dark Elves. I'm anxiously awaiting Valerian's elves whenever they decide to make their outing. If when and if that happens, man, my bank account's gonna hurt. But when they released Daughters, I was like, well, this is great. The Witch Elves are back. That was like, of the Dark Elves, they weren't my favorite faction, but I was like, okay, let's take a look at this. I've been playing Death for a while, and I was looking for a new army to play, and it was very different than how Death played. So I was like, this is interesting. I was deciding between Daughters of Khaine and Ideneth because they both came out roughly at the same time, and decided to go with Daughters. And so bought the book, bought some models, started playing around with it, and then I decided I wanted to convert up some eels for my Daughters of Khaine. I don't know why I decided this. I wanted 6 more Sargard in my Daughters, and I decided I didn't like the actual eels, so I took the Slaanesh mounts, the Seeker mounts,
Mm-hmm.
and cut the legs off and made them flying like eels. But then I wanted Spartans riding them because I thought that was really cool. And then I sat back and said, well, this is a really cool kit. What if I did this on foot? And I was like, well, how would I do that? And found that Carrick Acolyte kit. Realized, well, this could be a ridiculous project. What was originally going to be just another army I put out on the table became this ridiculous conversion project that took well over 100 hours end to end just to convert. And I went way off the deep end with it, but it was a blast. It started as just I wanted to do a new army, and then I kind of just fell down the rabbit hole with it.
Well, see, I mean, what's interesting is like, to anyone in the Midwest audience, maybe again, we're international. We have Australians and Germans watching the show. Yeah, the Midwest audience knows that like the Detroit Warhammer, by reputation, some of the best players in our scene. But you have a reputation for being competitive players, and here you walk away with this like hobby trophy and stuff like that, which I think I'm very cognizant of the fact that I don't think competitive is it's a box you check and then that's just what you are. I think that there's different spheres to the game and that everyone kind of like stands at some point in that overlapping Venn diagram.
Sure.
And you're talking about this like intensive hobby journey. What was that like when you did win your hobby award for them?
I was super, super excited. I've been wanting to get out there with them to give them a shot at winning something. But man, that was seeing all that work come end to end, and that blew my mind. I was super excited about it. And what was kind of fun is that we're, like you mentioned, we're kind of labeled as like a gaming club and a hardcore top tables club, and being able to get kind of a hobby award just like to completely change the angle to that narrative is awesome. And obviously you've got like Tyler and Andrea and a few of the other folks in the club, Al, Donnie, that are great painters, and they're kind of known for that. But it was fun to get to step onto that pedestal a little bit.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, and when you're winning hobby and man, it feels like a little bit of not an any given Sunday in the fact that like anyone can win it, but when you're going up against like Adam Trunzo, my friend Andrew Yells, like Bryce, like Domus, freaking Butch, like all these just heavy hitters of hobby, where I personally see all that stuff and I go, I might win it a one dayer, but I'm never gonna win for any of my armies, and I just get intimidated. And that maybe and then you just making the project because it was something it sounded like that really motivated you and was something you wanted to do, and then still being able to like walk away with some hardware on that front I think that's really encouraging to people to just, if you got a great idea, execute, see it through, and see where it takes you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So brilliant. We got a little bit of a hype train going off here, apparently, in chat, gang. Thank you so much, again, Mars. So I guess so this new book comes out. We kind of all went into a little bit of stasis. I know that people playing in their own bubbles.
Sure.
Maybe club night where you have people you trust to be healthy and show up and grind out some games. But you probably get a little bit of time to like reflect. And I mean, you've been selected now to what is now the event formerly known as ETC. The 2 years in a row. Obviously, last year was a little bit of bust.
Yep.
Awesome that you got to re-go again. So you're going to that. You have some time to assess. You have some time to think about it. Hey, what's my tournament going to look like in the Midwest going forward?
Yep.
Now I got to think about Worlds too. Are you still going to stick with Daughters of Khaine going forward? Are you going to use this as an opportunity to change gears? Or do you find your interest like revitalized because there's a new book, like a whole new book, and it's a whole new world? Like what's that like for you? What are you thinking?
I play a lot of different armies, to be quite honest. I've been playing Deepkin for the last 6 or so months, but I was playing KO for a bit before that. Before that, it was Ogres. I'm kind of bouncing all over the place. Honestly, I'm always just looking for unique things to play. Daughters is a great one. Now that the new book is out, I definitely want to give them a spin. I don't know if I'll fully re-up and dive back into the army and take it for a full tournament run. I have been like tempted to put another 40 or 50 hours of painting into it and just try to get them to maybe a painting trophy level, which would be a whole lot of work to do that. But would be kind of fun to compete for that. But yeah, I think, well, first we got to get the tournament scene open in general, right?
Right.
Hopefully, hopefully we're in a place where we can do that this summer, but we'll all see. Right now it's all preparation for Worlds, so it's really whatever the team needs me to play is what I will play. Right. So I'm going to be playing around with a bunch of different things, but until we're done with that, then that's my hobby for the near future, is just getting as many games as I can and learning different armies and doing research, really.
Right, right. I got a couple questions off of that. The first being, you've
Sure.
mentioned IDK a few times now. Are your IDK? Are you carrying that like those fiend conversions into your IDK now, or are you going a different hobby direction?
No, so Andrea was selling her Andrea Schwant was selling her IDNF, and it's this gorgeous green, orange, and gray scheme.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, I had to buy that army. It was nice that it already had 20 Thralls, 20 Reavers, and 18 Morsar in it. It had basically all the toys that I wanted. And then now I'm going back and adding things to it. So I'm copying her scheme and putting some Sharks and a Leviathan into it. I added some Ishlean Guard into it. So that's me trying to replicate her paint scheme and seeing how long it takes. And it takes forever, but it sure looks nice. But yeah, that's just been a project where I've always loved how IDNF played, and I never had really a chance to try them out. And Army came on the market. I was like, all right, I'm treating myself.
Yeah, there you go. That's brilliant. And so the other sort of like half of that then was you mentioned sort of like preparing for Worlds. We need to get the
Sure.
tournament scene open, and I try to be optimistic with my hobbies and the things that make me happy, even if I'm a bit of a pessimist in reality. I hope that I think we're going to see some tournaments in some capacity. That's my optimistic take as the vaccines roll out and more people get vaccinated and we're able to kind of reduce capacity of tournaments, be responsible, play decently, and just there's sort of heightened social awareness right now. I think that we just have of like public health and personal being just healthier with each other, right? I'm confident that I think that this is going out. And maybe I think maybe we flip these a little bit because World seems kind of pertinent to talk about right now.
Cool.
With the rebrand of ETC, I guess, do you want to? I think you could explain that maybe better than I could to the audience here, to chat gang.
Yeah, I mean, basically, Warhammer Fantasy, which is now AOS, has been part of ETC, I think, for the last like 15, 20 years or so. I need to look at how long that's been. But the ETC was the European Team Championship, and it was an event that was originally just between European nations, and it started growing beyond that. It's a 6-team event, so or a 6-player event. So each team comes with 6 players, and you have a full matchup process. You play 6 rounds. It's a pretty intense multi-day event. So basically, over the last year, there was multiple cancellations due to COVID, naturally, and I think the 40K group decided to go their own direction to do their own event, and I'm not on the committee that made any decision. We kind of go where it goes, but the group decided they wanted to kind of strike out on their own and build up our own event, and ended up rebranding it as Worlds, because at this point you've got nations as far as Australia, Canada, United States, of course Europe. I don't think we have any representation from Asia yet. No, we have Russia. Russia's there. So, but a good number of teams from all over the world, and really is a worldwide event. So it's really pretty exciting.
Yeah, I mean it's super cool because it's almost like becoming like World Cup. Not World Cup soccer. That's a lofty thing to compare it to. But I think about like the rooting interest of I'm a total homer for sports. Like I love all my Wisco teams.
Sure.
Rocking my Bucks cap right now. You can see the Green Bay Packer logo hanging up behind me somewhere. So I'm like gigantic homer. And when that World Cup soccer type event rolls around or like the Olympics, I'm just like USA, USA, and I get like I think it's fun because I think that for that rooting interest that's like inborn geographically speaking is just fun to play with. Now you're bantering with I'm trash talking like Doom and Darkness or
right.
Or AOS coach or something like that on Twitter as this event's about to ramp up. I think that there's actually kind of like a worldliness to it that brings people together. You get a little bit of a rooting interest. You get to kind of jab or rib some of your friends. But I mean, you are kind of representing U.S. Warhammer, right now. What's that like being? Is your second time picked? Obviously, the first time kind of like fell through. But what was that like?
Sure.
Maybe you can go back to that first time, like you got the nod, and okay, now I got to go game for America. If aliens invade, right? And they challenged us to a Warhammer tournament for like Dominion over Earth. We got to send a team from everywhere in Earth to go fight their like their Monstars or whatever, their intergalactic, like it's like that documentary Space Jam, right, where we
Yeah.
have to like defend the world. Like you're on that team, like you'll be playing the aliens, right? Like from
No, it was a pretty cool feeling. Obviously I was super excited right when it happened, but immediately after, it kind of hit me of like, all right, the pressure is seriously on. I mean, when like you just said, if you're representing the United States, you better not let people down, right? So the intensity with which you prepare and practice really starts picking up, and it's not about like not anything like winning at all costs or anything like that, but starting to think through every move that you make in a game, or why you're doing what you're doing, or even should I bother playing this because is this really going to help the team?
Mhm.
Um, you know, I'll play whatever the team wants me to play because that's what we need to do. And there's just you stop really caring almost about your own personal hobby. It sounds kind of weird, but like the hobby becomes the team doing well, and whatever it takes for that to happen is what you're going to need to do.
See, I like this vernacular you've used a couple times. Is like you refer to like the hobby or a hobby, and you're using it in like that sort of broader, interesting sense. Like as that the hobby becomes to work for my team. The hobby becomes to do
Yeah.
this. I really like that the way you're kind of like phrasing that. I just felt like that was important to point out here. Before I mentioned Hotspur resubbing for 10 years, dropping 1,000 RDP to remind everyone that checking and nothing to mess with, and Soren dropping a gift sub to AOS Coach there. Thank you so much, Mad Lad. And Coach, I will trash talk you, buddy. I might even put I might even put a little mini on the line that you have to paint for me when Team USA does better than Australia at Worlds. See,
Love it.
coming together.
Oh yeah. Let the trash talking begin.
Sword popping off, reminding everyone checking and none to fuck with. All right, there we go. You earned the F bomb out of me, chat gang. You're welcome. You did it. So like you said, the preparation kind of like ramps up, goes a little bit different direction with like prepping for something like maybe you do a little bit of a compare and contrast like this. So you're prepping for Midwest Meltdown or Adepticon. You've got
Sure.
your club scene that you're probably
Yeah.
a ton of games with versus I keep wanting to call it ETC, but versus Worlds where like now you have like a sort of nationwide team that's put together like that goes
Yeah.
pretty much coast to coast, and now you got to prepare and practice with them for this Worlds thing. Like what type of things that you do in general to prepare? What's different and is similar between the sort of the two different ways you've had to prepare now?
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, what you're doing is you're assessing what the meta looks like, what you think works well in the meta, what doesn't, what the strengths and weaknesses are of the top armies that are out there, and then trying to figure out a way to address them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether you're doing that as a team in a 6-player format, trying to solve that problem, or whether you're doing that in a 1-player format at a GT. It's a similar thing. It's a more complex problem when you're in a team environment, simply because you can skew further. So you can have these crazy shooting lists that don't do well in in a GT, right? If you're at a 5-game GT, rarely will you get to more than 4 wins with a pure gun line. It's hard to do because eventually you're going to hit something that you're going to hit Ideneth that just doesn't care about shooting, or you're going to hit something that's minus $1 million to hit, and you're never going to hit it, right? But if you're in a team event and you have one of those lists, you can protect it and potentially pair it into the matchup at once for the entire weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And for 6 straight games, it's just shooting armies off the table. And so that's something you have to be aware of and figure out how to get in there. And so the core part of it, where you're trying to figure out how to solve the game, is still there. It adds a whole nother layer when you get to the matchup side of things. So I think there's still a whole lot of practice in it, but there's almost a second game, which is the pairing process, which is, for me, it's a very new thing for me. I've never been a part of a pairing process for a 6-person team, and it's its own game, which is pretty wild.
Well, see, this is one of my favorite details about the team format. So you have a six-person team format. Essentially, you're bringing lists. You might have like
Yep.
a toolbox style list. You might have like your anchor list. You have
Hmm.
like the sort of just from some of the USA lists we've seen before. A lot they tend to have some really tacky or cheeky lists, which I think is really funny. Um, how American. Um, creative solutions to creative problems, right? But do you want to describe actually what that pairing is? I know I had Greg on before, but treat every episode like it's
Sure.
some viewers' first episode. Explain the pairing process of a team for someone that may not be familiar with that.
Yeah, basically, you have three scenarios per round. So your first two pairings are the first scenario. Your second two pairings are the second scenario. The third two pairings are the third scenario, right? And then what it ends up being is that one team will put up two players, and then the other team will put up one player, and then now you have your pairing, and then the other team will pick which of those two players to play that single player.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, you do this pairing process going back and forth, and it means that you might try to trap an individual player where you know they might have a list that you think is particularly weak for some reason, and so you try to present a pairing that they can't handle. You might end up having to throw one away. It's not uncommon for a player to get thrown under the bus and you get put into a matchup that you know you're going to lose. Like there's just no way you're going to win it. Like your goal is, can you get a point out of this round? It's scored on a 0 to 20 scale, and can you walk away with a point, maybe two? Then fantastic, you did your job.
Yeah,
Um,
the caboose roll or whatever, where you're
yeah,
essentially you have a player that you are like you say you're throwing under the bus, and the whole game of the whole role of the caboose, uh, pretty much across the tournament is like to try to get more points than the other caboose out there,
yep,
because you're
yeah, and it might change by round. You might have a round where you just have terrible matchups across the board for one of your armies, and you just throw it out there to try and draw some of those matchups early. And it's a process that I am not that experienced with, so I'm still learning it like from the top, really. So it's been really cool to dig into, but it's really its own game because theoretically, if you pair well enough, um, the game performance on the table matters a lot. So does luck, but you almost a third of how well you're going to play on the table is going to be determined by how good your matchup is.
Mhm.
If you have an army that's just perfect at one scenario and it's far better than the opposing army, even if that other player is twice as good as you, it's going to be very hard for them to get out of that like get out of that with a win.
Mhm.
So pairing well is a super interesting part of the whole event.
So you keep mentioning like it's something you've having been learned. Is this like Bill Souza's kind of coaching you on it? Do you have like Discord chats? Like how have you like
Oh yeah,
approached learning this at all? Yeah.
yeah. Bill really runs that down. Bill and Greg and a few of the other guys, they've done it before, so they're handling more of that. I'm learning it from a distance, but it's really the captain that does the pairing,
Mhm.
so they have to be the mastermind behind it. It's not that the team won't assist, but at the end of the day, at the event, it's the captain that's choosing the pairings, so it's going to be on them to make that happen.
Mm-hmm. That's really cool. Yeah, I had Greg, Colorado Greg, as he's
Sweet.
known in Discord, I believe, is he was on the show a little bit ago. We talked a little bit about like sort of his competitive streak from hockey and how that communicated into Warhammer
Yeah.
and his. So he was sort of essentially an alternate or like more in the coaching role, and now he's got his official bid to be on the team proper. So I know that was pretty awesome for him, uh, getting picked for the team itself going forward. So, yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to it. As I said, Coach, I await your inevitable defeat and the
Bring it on.
yeah, I love that
We'll be
nothing.
ready.
Yeah, go ahead. Like this is why sports are great. Like nothing I personally do. Like right now, I'm like, oh man, the Bucks lose every time I don't watch the game, and I'm very aware that they lost the last game because I didn't watch it. And I'm like, "Ah, see, I need to watch the game, and then they win. It doesn't matter. I love fan superstitions though; they're fantastic.
Truly.
um, so yeah, I guess going back to tournament prep, segue. Going back to
Ooh.
tournament prep, so like in general, when you prepare for like you okay, like hey, I'm probably playing this army. How do you go into like maximizing like learning that army, especially in that sort of
Sure.
competitive light? Does this involve a club night grinding out games, re-racking? What's that look like?
It's certainly a part of it. I mean, for me, I don't feel like I know an army at all until I've had maybe 20 to 30 games with it. Um, there's players out there that can literally just think through an army and take it to a table and make it do that and be able to solve all of the problems on the table. Adam Tronza is one of those players where I don't think he plays a whole lot. He just thinks through it, shows up at the event, and runs it. It's fascinating to me. I am not one of those players. I almost have to make every mistake on the table until I learn what those mistakes are and not make them. Mm-hmm. So for me, I try to get in as many practice games as possible, and I try to put my army and my list into situations where I'm not sure what it'll do. Mm-hmm. Whether that means it's a coin toss situation or a situation where I'm like, I don't know if this is going to work, which means I will lose most of my practice games. And I'll lose them badly. my first 10 practice games, it will usually be pretty ugly. I'll get wiped off the table because I'll just be like, oh, I wonder if I can do this. And then the answer is no, you cannot do that. And then I'll remember, I'm like, all right, don't do that. And through this process of finding all the stuff I can't do, eventually I figure out what I can do. It's not very innovative. It's really just hitting my head against the wall until I figure out a good solution. But yeah, for me, it's just how many games can I get in? How many reps can I get out there? So when it comes to our game nights, a lot of times we'll play 2 turns and then we'll get into position. You'll go through deployment. You play, maybe 2 turns. And you get to a point where you're at kind of almost a turning point in the game. You're like, okay, if I win the priority, I have a chance. If I lose it, I don't have a chance. Well, okay, let's just choose for me to win the priority then, because we already know you've won if I don't get the priority. So great, I get it. Then we play it out. And then we realize, oh, I made a huge mistake. Okay, can we back it up? Back out all of those moves. Let's try it again. Or a spell doesn't work. Yeah, but okay, what was the probability of that? It was 1 in 10 of that spell not working. Okay, pretty unlikely. Let's reverse that. See if it would have actually done what I thought.
This is almost like playing with some guardrails or some. You're actually setting up the situations that you want to see and playing through them, which I don't think necessarily other players do in their practice games. I think some people think about practice games as just let's just play a real game of Age of Sigmar, just all the way through, and
sure.
That's a practice game. But you're actually showing this purpose side of practice, which is, I think, significant. You know the significance of priority switches, the spells, and that's helping, I think, codify or ingrain some of those, the impact of those decision makings, and putting yourself in the position for the dice to even matter or be relevant to really help ingrain some of that.
You have to know what you can expect a unit to do. You have to know what its expected damage output is, and you can put it into a calculator all you want, and that does give you a good baseline to figure out roughly what your army does. But for me, I find that when I put it on the table, there's a lot of units that don't quite perform the way that you would expect them to, despite looking at the numbers. Whether that means their bases are too big and you can't get them all in combat, or maybe there's a unit that has very small bases, and so you can get them all in combat. You're looking at the scroll, it doesn't look amazing, and then you realize you got 60 of them in combat, and it is actually pretty good. There's a lot of situations like that. I think not every game is one of these constant re-rack games, that's for sure, because learning your late game scramble, when 3/4 of your army is dead and you've got a hero on 2 wounds, you've got a battle line unit with 3 models left, and then a monster that's, bleeding from 12 places, and that's all you've got. You've got a summoning pool, but you can't place it anywhere. Figuring out how to play that game, that's important. But at the same time, a scramble game is very similar, in my opinion, from one army to another. You might have slightly different tools, but the number of pieces on the table are so small that scrambling is to me, it's something that once you've learned how to scramble, you can probably do it pretty well across most armies, at least.
Right. I mean, there's every now and then there's the total backfoot army, right? But usually, for the most part, yeah. I mean, this is where we joke. We joke you're going to start seeing the wizard bonks when you're scrambling. That's when that D3 wizard bonk is going to start battering, and now your ogre mage having that that fat, what I like to call a fat ass, to use Magic the Gathering vernacular, having a fat ass or extra wounds suddenly starts to feel relevant. I guess how do you practice for scramble? Do you think is that play the game to the end, get into the
That's
scramble?
just
Like,
going to the end, yeah, and that's something where so I'm kind of talking out of both sides of my mouth here. Like I like doing the re-rack process, right, and getting through a lot of games in one day. But at the same time, there's a lot of value in playing a game all the way through, even when you know the outcome or you think you know the outcome. Oh, it looks like I just lost this game. It's bottom of turn 3. You got all the objectives. I'm pretty far behind. It's still valuable to play those turns and see what you can do, because you might actually be able to end up bringing the game almost all the way back and realize that if I had done this one thing on turn 2, I could have won that game. Or what did I need to do in order to put myself into a position where had I won that priority in turn 5 in the game? That's kind of like the second half. You have to know your strategic game, like what's your deployment, what's your early turn opening plan, what's your mid game plan to try to just win the game there, and then eventually you're gonna have to jump into scramble mode when both of you guys have beaten each other bloody, and you're playing with remnants to see what you can do.
mm-hmm. I like that you sort of term it as opening, mid, and then scramble. Like those are like the sort of 3 sort of temporal segments of the game where.
That's how I think of it, at least.
Yeah, no, I like that. I think that's really really important. Like the mid game is where you're going to try to like really take it home. Opening segment.
That's where your damage is.
Right.
Your early game is positioning and screening and making sure that you don't give away your army in turn 1 or maybe turn 2. And then turn 2 to 3 and maybe 4 is where you're trying to take out key pieces, do your damage, get positioning, and then turn 4 and 5 is where you're just locking down the objectives you have and making plays to lock up the points, maybe going for secondaries if your event has them.
Mm-hmm. Right on. Oh, I see. Kicker resetting the guests we've got here. Right on. Hey, Indigo girls, welcome to the show. And yeah, Kicker's got you sorted out there. So yeah, Jake, top level player, one of the Team USA for Worlds now, the event formerly known as ETC, and just a top tier player with DOK, Ogres, IDK, KO. Really plays as he's admitted a spectrum of stuff. So
all over the place, really.
all over the place. Yeah. No, excellent. So we talked about re-racking. I think most people know what we mean when we say re-racking.
Yep.
But just in case, if this is someone's first ever episode, when we say re-racking, we're talking about essentially you play your deployment, you get to a point, and then you just reset and redeploy effectively.
Easier than ever on a tabletop simulator too. You can actually save your position on it.
Amazing.
So if you want to play a lot of games in one afternoon, it's not as fun as rolling the real dice and moving real models, but you can get a dozen games in an afternoon on TTS. So pretty incredible thing with you can just save the game and then rewind it to where it was, and it moves all your models back to where it was. It's a pretty handy tool, I gotta say.
Do you find yourself internalizing the information out of TTS about the same as when you physically play a game, or is there
no? This for me, and this is like there's some players that it is a direct analog. For me, the spatial awareness is very difficult in TTS. Measure everything perfectly, and you have ways of looking at the table from multiple angles and at different levels. But it took me a long time to learn in TTS. Do not eyeball distances because you can't do it. Like you can do it in person because you're used to it, but you cannot eyeball distances in TTS. Just don't do it. And it took me a long time to figure that out. Mm-hmm. But the spatial aspect of it is a little hard for me, at least, to be able to estimate what a distance is. And obviously, the solution is just measure it out. But it's a little different. That said, I mean, when I can sit and watch two people play and see how they're fielding an army and see how they move pieces around, that's really interesting to me. For me, the part of the game I'm trying to learn most is the strategic part of the game, which is really deployment, and then figure out what your high-level strategy for the game is. Like, Are you going to sweep from one side of the board to the other? Are you going to sit on your back foot, wait for them to come to you, and then try to jump behind them? Like, what is your general plan, and how do you identify that quickly? That's a part of my game that I haven't been great at. And so the way I've substituted for it is just play a lot of games and eventually stumble into a strategy that works. But there's players that can look at a list and know the strategy from top of one, even if they never played it, look at their opponent, and they might make one or two mistakes across the game, but they in general know what they're doing and can play a fantastic game with almost no experience because of it. So there's a huge value in understanding strategically what your army is capable of and what the plan is for that list.
Mm-hmm. So, when you say like you keep talking about like assessing the plan,
Sure.
so you're going to have sort of like a plan for like maybe a battle plan. You're going to have a plan for your army, stuff like that. Like how do you sort of assess what you need to like really practice when you're going in? Like knowing what to practice to land on a good plan. Like how do you
Yeah.
assess that like at an inception sort of level?
Well, generally, when I'm practicing something, I'm going to start with just some of the basic 4 objective scenarios because I want to reduce variables.
Okay.
Early on, I don't know the army and I don't know the list. So there's a lot of things I don't know. So let's keep the scenario simple. Let's not have one that's randomizing. Let's not have one that has weird victory conditions. Let's just do something that's 4 objectives, whether it's a diamond or a square, whatever. That keeps the game roughly centrally located. So it's a game of Age of Sigmar, and gives me a chance to learn the parts that I don't know, which is how my army matches up against my opponent, what my list does, and what my rules are. Right. That's going to be my first 4 to maybe 10 games just to learn that. Right. Then you start understanding what the list does, and you can start seeing some weaknesses in that list. And then you start looking at, you probably started to optimize and tweak it and see like what you don't like, and what fits your playstyle, what doesn't. And at that point, you can start seeing if you're locking your list in of what, at least of roughly what you like, and you're going to see some scenarios that tweak in. Maybe you don't have a ton of durable heroes. Well, there's 3 hero scenarios, so maybe you try playing a couple of those. I think I'm really bad at Hero Hammer. I learned this with KO. I thought my KO were terrible at Hero Hammer, so I wanted to play that scenario a lot. I wanted to play 3 places of power because I was like, this is an auto loss for me. I thought I've got 2 5-wound heroes. This is terrible. What I didn't get until I put it on the table was that I can just put my army down, shoot all their heroes off, and the game ends. And I didn't understand that when I was writing my list, and I was looking at it, and I thought, well, I can't score. This sounds like a really basic thing, but this is something I learned by just repping it out. And when I realized that, I said, oh, I'm actually very strong in this scenario. Not in all cases, but in many. And then it completely changed my approach to, okay, this is not a bad scenario. This is a good scenario for me. So maybe I should rethink what I think are my bad scenarios, right? That's an example. Or some armies, you build the best castle in the world, right? Nothing can break that castle. Maybe it's a Fire Slayer army where you've got, I don't know, 3 blocks of Hearthguard, right? But you don't have tunneling or something like that. And then you get into a scenario like Star Strike. And you've got these unkillable blocks that might be in the complete wrong area of the table, and it doesn't matter how good they are, right? And then you realize, okay, maybe I need to adjust my list. And not saying that any of this is rocket science, right? It's just the process that you go through when you're seeing what is my list capable of, what is it not capable of, understand what my weaknesses are and what can I shore up.
Well, I think you're landing on something important because we tend to, I think, being a hobby game, I think a lot of people like, okay, these models are cool, these are the ones I like, and like, so they tend to like build an army like sort of like front to back rather opposed without like building the army, going forward, going back a little bit, changing it, going,
Yep.
like it's usually like a linear experience for people, and I think that it's very important to know that like the models, Age of Sigmar is played in 3 dimensions, and the strategies that the learning that you're taking on is coming in at 3 dimensions. You go through that progress linearly. Okay, I'm gonna play my army, play my list. We're gonna play Border Wars. Like we're gonna, go
Yep.
through this, and then like, okay, I like that you got to a point where you're like, I think I'm bad at Hero Hammer. I think I'm bad at these hero scoring objective games, and you got to a point where like you've already gotten in your first like 4 to 10 games, right? Now you're like reassessing, you're reevaluating your army's own weaknesses. Is there something about my playstyle I can change? Like, oh, yeah, I'm bad at scoring, but if they can't score, it doesn't
Yep.
matter. I just need a couple points, and they have 0 heroes. This reevaluating your weaknesses. Is it a weakness of the army? Is it a weakness of how you play? And looking at those two things and then addressing them. Sometimes you get to a point where you're like, okay, I'm going to be weak at this objective, like, or this battle plan. Well, let's hope
Mm-hmm.
I dodge it, or my opponent's worse, right? Like, or you get to that sort of like point where like you feel strong, and that goes into the meta assessment where you feel strong about like, okay, I've got in my prerequisite games, I've learned this army, I think I know it pretty well
Yep.
inside and out. I know what my weaknesses are. I'm either comfortable with them or I can compensate. And then at some point you got to play the game of Age of Sigmar, right?
Yep.
We got a question here from Indigo Girls. Jake, from all your armies games, do you find yourself gravitating towards certain lists or strategies?
So I have learned that I'm not great at like using Alpha Strike armies, which is funny because I was just
Eels?
talking about how I play Eels and KO. So people are gonna look at me like, "What are you talking about?" I am a reactive player, and I didn't realize this until I played Daughters. Daughters worked really, really well for my playstyle because it was a very reactive army. I could let my opponent do things and then wait to see what the openings they left me were and then play on that. My brain works very well in that way. I'm a very strong tactical player, meaning if I'm presented with two choices, I will likely make the better choice. But if I'm stepping back and there's a string of 40 choices that I have to make, that's very difficult. So I'm trying to figure out how to get there. That's what I'm working on personally. So like the thing about the Alpha Strike armies is unless you can take off their entire army in one go, you have to be really, really smart about when you commit and when you stay back. And that's why I wanted to play Ideneth so bad, is that it was something that I was not familiar with. That if you make a mistake, you get wiped off the table, right? Or if you put yourself in a bad position, you're just not going to lose, or you're just not going to win. So for me, that's like it's a more difficult way to play, but I'm learning it. So I think in general, I'm more of a reactive player rather than some players just love Alpha Strike armies. I know Brad is all about that. He likes armies where he can take top of first, or he's an aggressor army because he likes to just take control of the game, put his hand around its throat and just drive it home, right? That's his angle. And I'm more of a reactive player personally, so that's a style of army that'll work better for me.
Yeah, in Magic the Gathering we call it the beatdown and the control.
Yep.
So yeah, yeah, I'm more of a control player too. I like to see the game unfold. This is why I like Death, because they play sort of a methodical game. They tend
Yep.
to, like, you're a grinder. You're just sort of setting the trap and closing it, and
Yep.
and just grinding your enemy down. And
That's why Nagash played very well for me as well.
yeah,
Nagash and Reapers was pretty darn broken, not gonna lie. But that army just it worked very well for my playstyle. I understood how to put it together and how to string out the units and block up my opponents, how to shut off the right units at different times. So
right. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Let's see. We were talking about. I like that you talked about play style. Do you think having a particular play style, like harmonizing with certain armies, like when an army like sort of synchronizes with your play style, do you find yourself playing it better? Is that like playing to your strength? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, there's so I don't think it's a bad thing to try to shore up your weaknesses, right? I mean, obviously I'm trying to do it. That's more just I want to challenge myself.
Right.
But there are certain players that if you look at the armies they play, they always have a trend. And whether it's conscious or unconscious, those players know what they like and they keep gravitating towards it. I'll go back to Adam Trunzo, actually, because he and I were talking about this at Wapaka. Oh boy, this was over a year ago now. But
Last
if you look at
I played in,
I know, right? Same. And a lot of the armies he plays, they don't present a large single target. He doesn't like a single unit that does things. He doesn't want to sit there and have play the 3 threat build, which is a common thing that we do in Detroit. It's like build an army that has 3 threats, and then you're in a good place. he likes to have a dozen very minor threats.
Mm.
And he likes to be able to get all over the table and play the movement game and just dodge, 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 do a little bit of damage, like death by 1,000 cuts. It's how every build he's built has really been. I mean, his Skaven with the Storm Fiends were a little different, but if you look at the different armies, whether it's the Wood Elves he was playing or the Seraphon, they all followed this this evasion, movement, and control style. So he's a player that does that, and he's very, very, very good at it.
Super cagey.
His scramble game is fantastic, and he learned that, whether consciously or unconsciously, and decided, I want to scramble for an entire game. And he's won a lot of games because he scrambles from turn one. I'm sure he wouldn't refer to it as scrambling. It's because it's a very good way to play. I mean, the guy has won a ton of tournaments. He goes 5-0 all the time. He nearly took out Adepticon the other year, and it works.
Second at Adepticon, the last Adepticon that we had.
It's an example of playing to your play style, and I don't know if I have my head wrapped around what all the play styles are, with how big of a game AOS is and how quick it changes. Mm-hmm. I think there are a lot of play styles, but if you can figure out how you like to play, what kind of units you like if you keep gravitating to those units that can teleport, then there's something to that, then you like that, and that's not a bad thing. It's just, I think it's funny when somebody goes from one book to another and they end up choosing the same units again. It means that that's what they're gravitating towards, that's their style, and that's naturally how your brain works. So sometimes you just lean into that and figure out what army maximizes that, and you'll see natural synergies between you and the way you think and how your army plays on the table. It's just like natural synergies between units, is that if your brain works the same way that the army is written, then you're going to be in good shape.
Right on. Yeah, your club mate here, Nuke Doctor, saying shout out to Adam Trunzo. Some of the best games I've played were against him. Yeah, shout out to Trunzo indeed. He's one of those players that I kind of admired from afar from a little bit, because when you're first getting into the tournament scene and you do have like a mind for competition and enjoy tournaments and stuff like that, from the angle I came in at from, which is like, I'm not used to like hobby and community and stuff like that. I'm used to like, if I lose 2 games, like dropping out of the tournament and playing in a side event, like that Magic mentality that I've tried really hard to get rid of, because it's kind of douchey. But I think I've cured it now. I think it's been like 3 or 4 years, going on 4 years now. I've cured it. I'm fixed now. I'm okay, everyone. But like I remember, looking at, I'd see Trunzo's name showing up. I'd see his lists on like the TGA forums. Mm-hmm. I'd see, I saw Brendan's because he won Best Death at Adepticon like right around the time I was looking at the stuff. I remember seeing these players and like kind of admiring them from afar and being like, hey, wait, I might actually run into these people at tournaments. And then like Trunzo, you meet him and I'm like, this is kind of like everything I want to be as a Warhammer player. He's like the trifecta of like just a great person, great gamer, and a great hobbyist.
For sure.
Display boards are breathtaking. So serious shout outs to him.
He was doing display board commissions at one time. I don't know if he still is. It was maybe a year or 2 ago that he was starting to crank some of this out. Those were really cool.
He did a display board for he actually volunteered to do a display board for the Rantathon that I did last year, where we raised money for mental health. So that was one of the grand prizes. I didn't check back in with him to see how that went, but there's a whole shadow council that like has taken over now. Like I'm just a face. Yeah, Indigo Girls, pop the earbuds in, hoodie up, MTG, yep, grinder strat. Yeah, and I mean, I used to malign that, rabbit hole 1 of the evening. Sorry about this. I used to malign that, but then I realized like some people do have like, sort of hidden disorders or something like that. Like you might be dealing with somebody who isn't super comfortable in a social. You have thousands of players at a GP or like a Grand Prix or a Pro Tour qualifier. Thousands for Age of Sigmar, and that's Legacy. That's the less popular than standard version that I played. Like they you might have someone that like might be on the spectrum or has a difficulty around strangers and stuff like that. So I used to malign the MTG like guy with hoodie and headphones and doesn't talk to you guy. I've since gone back and kind of reassessed that, and I'm not going to make fun of it anymore, but it is a stereotype. It's a funny stereotype. You get this like, hey, it's a douchebag, and it's maybe they just don't like, they're not comfortable around people. that is a strength of Magic the Gathering that I don't often talk about because it's way fun. It's way more fun to make fun of Magic when you have a show. But I I could I don't know that I could play Age of Sigmar with somebody I can't talk to, let alone someone from like Japan that doesn't speak English or something. Whereas I had perfectly great games of Magic the Gathering with people who we didn't share a common language
Sure.
whatsoever. You know, like
Yeah, this it's one sided. It's not that it's like non interactive, but when you do your thing, your opponent can't stop that or be involved in it.
yeah, there's interruptions. You know,
Sure.
you have
Yeah.
instants and stuff like that. But the thing is like you put the instant on the table. They don't say anything to you. They put an instant down. You check what their thing is. You're interacting with the stack, and you learn just enough common language with like rules mechanics. I don't know that I could do that with
Yep.
Age of Sigmar. Um,
I had a game on in a TTS tournament a couple weeks ago where I was playing somebody from Team Spain, and he didn't speak. I would say he was probably fluent in English, but didn't know all of the words in for Warhammer, right? And so he had a translator, and so we were trying to play not face to face over TTS through a translator, and then of course at the end of the game a super complex rules interaction comes up, and it was hilarious. We worked through it. He was a great guy. It was an awesome game too. It was the bottom of turn 5 is when that ended, but it basically came down to a Leviathan charging a unit of Sisters of the Watch that can stand and shoot, but I had another Ideneth unit close enough to them that they couldn't shoot the Leviathan because there's another unit closer to them, but then the Leviathan got within 3, and so they couldn't shoot the other unit either. It was a weird interaction, but explaining that through a language barrier, which is a very complex rules interaction, I was dreading it. I'm not gonna lie. I was like, oh no, this is gonna be bad. Like he's gonna think I'm trying to pull one over on him. But then his teammates jump in the channel and they're like, no, this is what's going on, and they explain it, and everybody was really cool about it, and it worked out really well. But that it's just an example of in Age of Sigmar when you're not face to face and you might not be sharing a full common language. Yeah, it's going to be difficult. And at Worlds, English is the common language. It's the required language at the table, but that doesn't mean that someone's a native English speaker. You know, there's native, then fluent, then working is the different levels of fluency. And even if you're fluent, English is such a ridiculously complex language that you might not know the interactions, like retreating and piling in. Like you might not use that terminology, and it's makes things a whole lot more difficult.
well, I saw I can't remember who did the tweet. I was reading a retweet of whoever did the initial tweet of some rules
Sure.
writer talking about when they started Age of Sigmar, like the command from on high was to write rules like prose and not in rules language. And this isn't a thing bad or thing good. I think that like the internet
Mm-hmm.
makes a tweet like that, and then like I'm like now you're gonna have sides form on whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, and I'm like this is I'm a little bit more nuanced than that on Rantcast. Y'all know this, chat gang. Um, but it was a eureka moment for me actually, and this ties into what you're saying in that like you're writing English prose, not rules language with proper nouns capitalized of
Mm-hmm.
situations. Like, pile in isn't necessarily codified language where it's in
Yeah.
capitals, bold letters at all times in every
Yep.
translation of the book. Whereas like tapping to attack in Magic would be like, it's have the Japanese text and then it has the little thing for tapping, and like that
Yep.
means to tap the card. And that's what it is so you have someone speaking like total Japanese. I played more like Japanese and a lot of Japanese and German players when I was a Magic grinder. So I keep going to those two languages. So play someone like they be like speaking like total German the whole time or Japanese, and then tap and like so they and then just like this
Mm-hmm.
English word would come in there. You don't necessarily have that in Age of Sigmar because it is that like sort of top down. They want it written like prose. And again, this isn't a thing good, thing bad. I think we always talk about how like Magic has the better rules and Age of Sigmar has bad rules. And I'm like I don't think that's a useful metric. This is again, I'm working through this right now. This has been a eureka moment for me in that like, yeah, you're right. They are written like prose. And so I've had to like kind of go back and I'm like, does this mean I like them now? Like because what happens when you write your rules like prose is the flavor of the game.
Mm-hmm.
When you have to find a different word for every standard bearer in the whole game, because you can't say this unit has a standard bearer. That's a barrier to the rules, right?
Mhm.
But I know that the unit captain in my Ossiarch Bone Reapers Mortec guards are Necrophoros. That's so much more metal than like the command unit, right? Like, and so like I'm going through and like rules are more than just like a series of if thens to help us. They're the language that the designers use to communicate their game to us and how they think we should play it. It's a dialogue between designer and player. And there's something to be said for concise and clear and straightforward, sterile rules that are beyond contestation, beyond misinterpretation. Magic has complications too, by the way. Um, but there's also something to be said for the flavor of your world also coming from your rules. That's kind of interesting to me. That a game, they wouldn't have to have a single black library novel, and you still have an idea of what Warhammer, the world of Warhammer is like, just from how they write a rule. And that's something pretty special. Because they go that more this is just something I've been thinking about like these last couple weeks since I've seen the tweet.
And it's not to say that rules can't get better.
Oh no,
They
no, no,
certainly
Thunder,
can, but
100%.
it's a very different game. The product of Age of Sigmar is not Magic the Gathering, and ultimately it really can't be. Magic the Gathering is a 2D game,
Right, linear.
and that's not knocking it. It's two dimensions, right? Whereas Age of Sigmar, the way it works is a 3-dimensional game, which makes it far more complex as far as how movement interaction is and precision. A model can get bumped. That's a thing. And that makes it very hard. If a model gets knocked over and you put it back up, was it a quarter inch closer? And that might change a game. That might make a charge.
Yeah.
So it's not as precise of a game, but in a way, it's kind of also fun because of that.
Well, there's a little bit of like that, like embracing the chaos and like leaning into the wind, and you feel like you're like navigating the wild seas, and you can do that proficiently. And
I mean, at the end of the day, we're playing toy soldiers, right? This isn't. We're not playing this for money. And honestly, if there ever was Age of Sigmar for money, I don't think I'd ever want to play it. I don't want any part of that game. You know, this game isn't really built for that kind of competition, in my opinion. I know that's a big tangent, but it doesn't really work like that. I think it's beautiful when it's not. There aren't those giant prizes. So it's just people playing for the love of the game.
It's the passion. Yeah, it's the passion game. Like there's Age of Sigmar is, and I, you talk about like we talked about earlier, but I don't like to like be like, hey, it's a competitive player. Then you just check the box and it's just a modifier that they have all over their like it's just the stain that they have on their existence or whatever. Like no, because even the competitive players, there's a reason they're here in Age of Sigmar versus another game. And to me, it's because it's that passion. Like there's a passion through and through. Even if you don't consider yourself a great hobbyist, you are kind of painting to get to the table with an army. You still have that like I'm putting in this time,
Yep.
like I'm putting like sure you can commission, fine, but like time is money and gotcha, checkmate. You're still putting in the amount of time. It's got to be worth your time. Grinding games takes more time. There are things out there that pay better, take less of your time, and are pretty approachable that you could go into if you wanted to really get into like a competitive scene and like just wash noobs all day long. Like there's a game for you. Age of Sigmar is a passion project at I think every level. Even Brad's a little bit of a conundrum to me because I'm like, what's your favorite army? And he's just like mercurial and evasive. I think it's Tzeentch. I figured out like it might be Tzeentch, but but like for the most part, everyone's had like you've mentioned some elves, right? Like dark elves, and you've talked about that. Sean's got a fan of death, like So everyone, Trunzo loves his rats. Like most competitive players I know in this game still have their leaning. They might migrate off their army for a while.
Take a field trip,
Yeah. You got to go to the vacation home. Just saw my thing here. You got to go to the vacation home every now and then. You got to go to the beach house. Get away from the army that you're grinding. But yeah, I mean, everyone like even one of my main sort of objectives when I started doing this show was to show that like the game isn't these hard lines between types of players so much as it is like overlapping spheres of
Hmm.
interest. And some people out there are super competitive about playing the game of Age of Sigmar, but also super competitive about painting. And some people are super casual about like playing the game of Age of Sigmar, but really competitive about their painting. Like you have like there's people out there who want to win narrative contests for writing stories about their armies. Shoutouts to Dog 2 Plus Stuff. like like again, competitive is like it feels like people draw the line in the sand between a competitive and casual, as if that this is, I think that there's a competitive approach to the game, or like, hey, I go into this wanting to win, or wanting to win hardware, which is even yet a different gear. There's a gear between I want to have a winning weekend, and I want to walk away with hardware, right? There's a gear between those two, but
Hmm.
but again, I just
Well, I think when you look at an event, and this kind of almost goes back to our preparation, you have to kind of step back and decide, what do you want to do? Like, what's your goal for the event? And I've heard other folks on other podcasts say this too, but like, figure out what you want to do. Like, do you want to try to win that event? That might not be reasonable on your first go, but do you want to try to win more than you lose? Okay, that's a fine goal. Or if you've done that for a few events, do you want to try to go 4-1 or 4-2, or do you want to try to go for the 5-0? Always takes luck, but like there's different levels of preparation. Or do you want to go and take a weird army to the event and be that hero that goes 4-1 with like Beasts of Chaos, right? And you just brought all this garbage. You just dump it on the table, and people look at it like, what does this thing even do? And then at the end of the game, they're just sitting there with a 1,000-yard stare on, trying to figure out how they just lost that
what just
game.
happened?
Even
Yeah,
though they tabled you in 2 turns, somehow
yeah.
you've got a goat in each corner of the table and you've won. Or are you there for hobby and converting and painting? Like those are all very valid things. But even when you zoom in on the gaming, there's so many different ways to look at it. Like when I took that ogre army, ogres are by no means bad. They're good. But in the meta that I took them to Wapaka, that was during the continued reign of Petrifex Elite. Bringing a bunch of ogres with no rend was not a good plan against 3+3 rolling saves. I mean, come on, that was not a good idea. But for some reason, I was like, I want to take a couple of Griblies and just drive them into big units. I thought it was going to be fun. And I mean, it ended up being a blast. You have different goals for different events, and you do different things. Like I still have on my bucket list, I want to build up a Beast of Chaos army, and I want to take it. I want to see if I can go 4-1 somewhere.
Yeah.
So Chaos Dwarves to Michigan GT, went 4-1. I nearly beat a Daughters of Khaine player, Anthony, who's also on our team. And I nearly beat him through absolute jank. I had no business winning that game, and I did not win that game. But just by winning the right priorities, I managed to stay in the game the whole time.
Mhm.
And that was so fun playing against the boogeyman of the meta, which is this wild Daughters of Khaine army with this pile of garbage, basically, that was my Legion of Asgore, and staying in the game for 4 turns and only watching it slip away at the turn 5 priority. I was like, okay, that's pretty fair. That made my weekend, right?
Yeah.
It's a different way to approach events. Like maybe that can be more fulfilling than winning the whole thing sometimes.
I think there's something to that. I think there really is. I mean, preparation begins with setting your expectations, right? And realistic expectations are important for growth. If you have unrealistic expectations, you're going to fall short. You're going to get demotivated.
Incremental growth. You got to think about that. Right. That's why I'm always pinning what I want to do. Like I'm trying to still learn my strategic game. This is going to be a multi-year process for me to get better at that. But understanding what are my steps. Like I want to be less uncomfortable in deployment. I don't want to feel like I'm confused at the top of turn 1 when I have the turn. Like I don't want to be debating what I'm going to do. I want to have my plan set, or whatever that is for that tournament. And no matter what your goal is for that tournament, whether it's win 3 games, whether it's not lose all of your games, whether it's take a janky army and try to go 4-1, there's preparation you can do for all of that to try and maximize any list and any army you've got.
I guess what are some preparation you'd suggest for as someone who's taken some janky armies 4-1? What were some things that helped you get ready for doing that? Did you have to learn the meta? Was it just like a prayer and like luck?
First off, what helped me most were my matchups. I got lucky. I got very lucky. I played the Boogeyman. I played like Slanesh. I played a few other armies. but I didn't play like the hardest varieties that were out there. So I'll be honest, I got good matchups. I had no business going 4-1. I should have gone 3-2. But in that tournament, I played against Slaanesh. I played against Nagash. Played against Skaven, Daughters of Khaine, and I can't remember the other one. But it was like it was a ringer of like if you looked at the allegiances, you're like those are the scariest allegiances that were out there. The builds were slightly off, but with my army being underpowered, I sure felt it. But when I was looking at the list build, I was first trying to figure out with this army, are there any diamonds in the rough? And with Legion of Asgore, there actually are. A lot of their scrolls are fantastic. What they don't have is the internal synergy that like takes them to that next level.
Yeah, those force
the
multipliers.
Themselves,
yeah.
If you look at their efficiency, they're incredible. Kadai are amazing. I can't believe we don't see them more often. It's just very hard to get them into armies because it's either mixed chaos. It could be Legion of Chaos Ascendant, or it can be Legion of Asgore. But I mean, it's a 4-wound ethereal unit that runs and charges, has a 3-inch reach, and has 5 damage D3 attacks. I mean, and for 480 points, you get 12 of them. You have 48 wounds of that. It's scary. So that was like one unit that I had. I was like, all right, I have to have one of these. Had a little bit of shooting. But then I looked at it and said, all right, if I play against Slaanesh, I just lose. Someone's going to come in and farm my Kadai for depravity. So that's where I was like, okay, I got to get janky here. And I allied in a Beastman Shaman and got the Wildfire Taurus for the Strikes Last. And I was like, all right, I'll play your Activation Wars game. It's not going to work, but I'm going to shoot a bowl at you.
Well, I love Beasts of Chaos. I really do, because you're talking about like diamonds in the rough. Wildfire Taurus is one of those like dumb equalizers, and unlike other endless spells that don't blow back on your stuff, it 100% blows back on your stuff.
Yeah. And when you're playing Beast, it doesn't just blow back; it does D6 to every one of your units, and then Battle Shock wipes them out. We had, so for our team, one of the practices that we had before everybody was in the team is kind of like a tryout. We were all assigned armies. We were assigned the worst armies in Age of Sigmar. And it was a who's who of what the worst books were. And it's like, that's what you have to play in this tournament between us. And so here's your pile of garbage. Good luck. So I got Beasts. And so I played 14 practice games with Beasts to try to figure out how to make these things work. I watched that army just completely collapse in the most comical ways. It was so fun and so frustrating. I thought I had this beautiful plan set up, and then my bowl would go the wrong way, go straight through the center of my army, and half my army implodes, and it's over.
Well, what's funny is like it's just like when I'm playing that army, I feel like a beautiful mind, because like I'm just looking at the table and like all the equations are showing up, and I'm like, okay, so like 10 inches here plus okay, screen these out, get about 20 inches, 4 inches on either side, all right, and then 20 inches here, and just making these weird convex shapes where like, okay, you're gonna kill it, it's dead, but like you have to take a turn to kill it, and like the problem is when people have pile-in shenanigans and stuff, and then it starts to fall apart really fast.
Well, it's one of those armies. I know it's really bad and it's a meme right now, but I keep looking at it. I'm like, there's a lot of tools in that book.
Such great battle options.
It has a rend spell. No one seems to know this. It has a boost rend by 1 spell.
Yeah, and
that's sweet.
Yep.
It has a reduce saves by 1 spell as well. That's in addition. It also has a reduce saves aura from its piece of terrain. It has a fight last spell. It has all these tools. It can ally in slaves to darkness, which you can do all kinds of ridiculous stuff with. It has one of the best, the little war bands. With the
Thrash Rack is great. Yeah, +1 to hit, so, and it's not keyworded. You cast it on the unit, so it works for like allied stuff.
It's great. Yeah. There's a lot of like cool little things. Bestigors on paper are very, very good. It's on the table, not as good.
Running them in MSU, they work a lot better. It's the 4-inch pylon helps a little bit, but those 32 mils just
they do a lot of damage. I was taking them in 20s, and I don't think they're even worth 20s, but has a lot of 1-drop armies. You can do a lot of 1-drop builds or 2-drop builds and really put your opponent in some weird situations. It's a weird book. It's one of those books that if it gets a little nudge here or there, or the game meta changes just slightly, I think it could become good. It's not quite there.
That's where like when I took it to Holy Havoc and did not lose a game. We you guys, I think your team won Holy Havoc that year.
Yeah, that's the year where it was I had Chaos Dwarves. Yeah, it's Chaos Dwarves and and Beasts. It was
Yeah,
Beasts and Chaos Dwarves. Yeah.
yeah, we were Beasts of Chaos and Maw Tribes. Halo was bringing Maw Tribes, and we didn't lose a game. And like the jank I was putting down on tables, like someone's playing like it was really funny, and just like I don't think I summoned once, even though I had like I could desert. I didn't summon. I brought my Manticore. I'm like, I'm gonna summon a Manticore. That's the goal for the weekend. I'm gonna summon a Manticore, like because these things are cool. Like I think they reroll charges or they have an extra die on the charge, something
They
like
get
that.
+2.
Plus
They
two on
get
the
a
charge.
native +2.
Yeah,
They're a great summon.
yeah,
If you
great.
summon them by a hero, it's a rerollable 7. That's not.
Yeah, I'm like, this is a great. I'm gonna summon one because I could rush it out turn two. Like, I just summoned fucking Ungor all weekend, like all fucking weekend. Just
It's so good though. For 3 points to summon Eat at a 10 Ungor, you can sack your own Ungor for D3. Basically, for every 2 Ungor you kill, you crap out an extra unit. And I mean, I know when I was playing
I was going.
our tournament, it was often every single turn I was putting 10 Ungor on the table. And it was so frustrating for my opponent because they were just ripping the heart out of my army. And then I just pop up on the objective and like, this is mine.
Yeah, yeah. Oh,
It's
because it's
so bad.
within six. Because wholly within 6 inches with some of this. Like, if you have your 12-inch in, you'll exactly capture on most battle plans. So I'm just like, you don't have enough coverage to stop me from doing this. It's just like when you're running like
Yep.
all herd and like so you can burn all my CPs became
Yep.
summoning point. I was just like
Yeah,
crapping up.
I missed that the Aether Quartz Brooch
Yeah,
and
that
the
was fun.
Knowing Eye combo with the All Herd and just every time you spend that command point it keeps coming back
Yep.
and before you know it you've summoned 20 units of goats all over the place for no reason.
I ran out of
And then they
models
just kill them all and you're like, oh great. All
Yeah,
right, well,
well
that was fun.
they could only be in so many places. I remember playing against Mike, Sardonic Mike or what from Indy. I was playing against him, and he was on his like orcs, and I just like kept baiting his army in two different directions because like he had this like just like kick your ass ball crusher that could just table me, but like he couldn't stop me, and all I needed was for Haywo to distract him slightly, like and keep him off my herdstone for a second, and he did that, and then it was just like, okay, I'm gonna contest this objective, that objective, and that objective, and just sitting there like, what are you doing? Oh yeah. Oh no, it's way dead. Like don't even roll dice. I'll take it off the table. It's gone. I remember doing that.
Yeah. No, please remove that. I can't stand the sight of them anymore.
Yeah, there's some fun stuff. So Nuke Doctor mentioned something in here. Losing a lot of practice games, which is the
Yep.
ways to prep.
My moniker for sure. It's usually Sean that's whipping me side to side. He's like, man, this army sucks.
But also,
no, it's me. I suck.
you just like you are like you're like the, I don't know if you watch anime, but you're like the Rock Lee of Age of Sigmar. Or like just practice. You're just a genius of practicing. Like that's your skill. That's how you're able to like keep up with people who cast spells and have magic abilities, helping them get better at Age of Sigmar. Just practice a lot, lose a bunch of games, and eventually you'll get great.
I know, right? Eventually, you'll figure out what not to do.
Right. No, I mean practicing with a purpose, I think, is one of the big. That's like that's one of those parts that I think most people need to unlock. Just grinding games is useful. I mean, as a requisite, I would just play 10 games with your army. Period.
Sure, it's a great start.
That's like a great starting point. Anyone can kind of get that. That's a approachable. I want to play 10 games with this army, right? And then once you get those 10 games in, then you start that purposeful, like, okay, re-racking on your deployments if you notice you've lost a deployment. Like, that's when you start engaging some of that other stuff. One of these things has also kind of come up a couple times is like we keep talking about boogeyman armies. I think it's so important to play against boogeymen. It's very helpful that you're in the Detroit Warhammer Club. You have a lot of you have a good variance of people around you to play against. Like, okay, I'm gonna play against Brad Slanesh. Let's see that.
Yep.
Like what's this Slanesh gonna look like if I run into him at the tournament, let alone somebody else playing Slanesh. How important do you think it is to play against Boogeyman, and how do you approach like playing Boogeyman with, say, okay, you are bringing one of your trash armies, or you are bringing an army where you traditionally lose against that Boogeyman? How do you
Yep.
get meaningful practice out of playing against Boogeyman so that when you run into them at a tournament, I mean, you're not as intimidated and you kind of know how they work to know how to disrupt it?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is to understand how the book works, right? Like, if you're afraid of fire slayers, well, go get the book and read it top to bottom. Just understand how the interactions work, understand what triggers the abilities. I mean, the easiest part of it, that's the really straightforward part, is look, if the heroes aren't alive, they're not getting their 4 up, right? Um, but that's an example, right? Um, but when it comes to an army that just can't beat them, so let's say I'm trying to take Beasts of Chaos versus Fire Slayers. That is a matchup I will never win, because those Fire Slayers, if they're in Hermdar, they have always strikes first. I charge them, I die.
Hmm.
That's it. And then they charge me, I also die, and then slowly they just roll me over. And so I immediately have to think about that as, okay, I can't fight in combat, I can't kill them, and I can't survive them. So what can I do? Well, I guess I can get in their way. I can try to get in their way very quickly. I can do anything I can to slow them down, and I can hang on for dear life, and then hope that maybe they leave some room on the edge of objectives for me to jump onto.
Hmm.
Like that's how I would approach it. But then until you get onto the table and play it, you might not think of it that way. I've played other matchups where I just thought it was an auto loss. I was just looking at it, I was like, there's no way I win this. And then I get onto the table, I start putting the pieces down. I'm like, fine, I'll go first and try to do my Alpha Strike thing, and then realize that my Alpha Strike actually wiped out all of the critical pieces, crippled the army, and now I'm in almost an auto win position.
Hmm.
And I'm like, okay, well, that's very different. Sometimes you just don't get that until you put it on the table and actually do it. Because everybody has biases, and so like recognize that. Sometimes you have a bias where you think that your army is better than it is, which is a thing. Sometimes you think it's worse than it is. I have like almost a pessimistic bias where I'll be like, I just don't think it can beat that. And then you get on the table and realize that, well, that unit can't be everywhere.
Hmm.
No, you can't kill Marathi, but if you stay, 18 inches away from her, then she can only do so much damage to you. Or you know what? Just keep throwing 10 archers at her
Yeah, just
and take your 3 wounds a turn. Like, look, it's going to take a couple of turns. Don't worry about it. Handle the rest of the army and just keep ticking away the wounds. Or put her into a tar pit and let her sit there and hit her head against those Hearthguard berserkers, and neither of them are going to kill each other. They're just going to stare at each other.
yeah. Well,
Great.
I'm I'm a big proponent of drown it with skeletons is like one of my go-to strategies. Like if
Sure.
I can't deal with, drown it with skeletons. Like you're gonna be here a while.
Yep. Yeah, not a bad idea. Um, yeah, and so it really comes down to like first understand what those armies are, and it changes depending on the time. Right now it's Zinch and Seraphon. To some extent, it's KO.
Hmm.
There's some edge Nurgle lists out there that are absolutely terrorizing people, and then there's always your niche stuff as well. But
IDK has had a stigma since it came out, like as like the oppressive alpha flying 16-inch murder you eels. This was an army I got beat by at Adepticon, and it kind of like kept me shy of like my goal for Adepticon weekend, and I refused to lose to IDK ever again. We so I just went and I practiced tons and tons of games against IDK, and I'm like, okay, what are they trying to do? Okay, they can do their board edge, basically auto charge me. And there's
yep,
virtually nothing I can do to stop it apart from like screen suboptimal or
yep,
screening it potentially or deploying suboptimally. You know what? I learned very quickly deploying suboptimally didn't benefit me in any of those games. It's like, sure, throw out like a screen to where like to keep them honest, but like stick to my deployment, because if they want to, they can just march from the back end of the table to be here on turn 3 when it
yep,
matters anyway. So it's like almost just let them go for that deployment and then force the hand, try to do my
yep,
damage before they get to do it. And like learning how that army worked went a long way. I play slow death armies, right? Like
mm-hmm.
learning how to compensate for that stuff. And then I still haven't really lost to IDK in 2-3 tournaments now, and I've played them each time. I went to NashCon going, I'm going to play against IDK. I'm going to play against IDK. Brendan's like, no, you're not. Don't throw that out there. Played against them round 3, beat them. Like get wrecked. with at the time dwindling legions of Nagash, as they had been
I think
diminished.
the key here is to get also into understand what your opponent is seeing as well. A lot of people think that their opponent is always going to make the absolute optimum move,
Right.
and that might not be the case. Like when you're sitting there looking at what you're imagining your opponent is going to do, you always have what your nightmare scenario is of like what they do, but that might not actually work for their game plan. That might not be their plan. They may not make that optimal move. They might miss it too. People make mistakes. Even when you're on the top tables, it's not uncommon for somebody to make 1 to 2 mistakes in the game. And those are the mistakes that if you're ready for them, you can take advantage and break the game open. With armies like Ideneth, that are armies that try to take control of the game, you have more opportunities to break their game plan because it's their job. Like they have to make the game happen, not you. So with an Alpha Strike army like that, understand what they're going to try to do roughly, and just try to break it.
Disrupt
All you're
it,
doing
yeah.
is playing defense.
Yeah.
Screw them up. You don't actually have to have a great plan. Your plan could just be to ruin their plan and then play from there. That's a valid strategy. Also, think about what they're afraid of. Like, there is no army in AOS that doesn't have anything. If you're coming to the table with a complete garbage army, like, you're still gonna have something in it. I don't like to go to a tournament without feeling like I have a chance in at least every game. Like I want to have something. But there's something in your army that they're afraid of, and understand what that is, and think about how they're gonna approach that, and you can play around that.
Yeah, you can. I mean, this is where the mind games of it come in. You can bait them into a suboptimal
Yeah.
position if they're afraid of this unit and they're deploying away from it. I can use that. I can use that to get them off their game plan. I mean,
and maybe you're not even going to use that unit offensively. Maybe you're going to use it the whole game as board control or as movement control, or as just a threat. And then turn 3, they realize you're not even going to really use that unit. It's too late. It's held its objective for 3 turns or whatever, and it did its job. And then they come in turn 4 and kill it, but who cares?
Yeah. I mean, you understanding another army, what other armies are trying to do, and that part of this comes with experience. Part of it comes with practicing with a purpose, right? But understanding what an army is trying to do and just disrupting that. It's such a useful tool when you're trying to get better at Age of Sigmar. But you can't understand what another army is trying to do unless you seek understanding of that army. Get over some of your cognitive biases that, like, okay, this is unwinnable, unbeatable, best thing ever. Cool. All right, it is. Now move on. What stops it? How do you disrupt it? What is it trying?
Even look at when Slaanesh was in its heyday, right?
One of the most.
I was playing Daughters of Khaine at the same time, so like, I mean, Daughters was just as bad as Slaanesh, but for some reason somebody else was taking the hate mail. But it was funny to me because everyone was looking at it like, this is unbeatable, and then I'm looking at these Slaanesh armies and they were 95 wounds, and I was like, can somebody shoot them? Like, I was playing Daughters. I had my own broken way of handling them, which was absolutely terrible. I had Marathi, I had single wound models. I was like, I've got my plan, right? So I was happy with that. But I was looking at this, it was like, and this is where, of course, where the meme, the shoot the characters.
Just shoot the heroes.
But, like, there were shooting options at the time. And I was shocked that shooting didn't show up, which is why Team America 2 years ago took that Free People's list. They had all of those stand and shoot options. Yeah, put that up against Slaanesh. Charge me, you're dead. Don't charge me, well, you're also dead. Get in combat with me, you're not getting depravity, then you're dead. It was a great spoiler list that nobody knew what to do with. And every time we've had one of these boogeymen lists, there's an option for it. Right now, I'm struggling to challenge or to solve some of these boogeymen lists, but like the Slaanesh list had a very strong weakness. So did the Feck list that was scaring everybody back. With the nuclear
original, the original,
which was really good.
Yeah,
but I mean, there were weaknesses to that too. You gotta, like, none of these lists are completely unbeatable. Players might make mistakes. Go buy the book, read the book to dig into it, understand what that allegiance does. Because every time I am terrified of an army, I get the book and then I realize, oh, it can't do all 5 of those things at once. It can do 3 of them. 3 is scary, don't get me wrong. But those other 2 it can't do. I don't have to worry about them right now. And now that there's only 3 things to worry about, maybe I can solve that problem, or maybe I can give myself a 20% chance of winning that game that I thought was
A
completely
0%. Yeah.
unwinnable.
Yeah.
That's a big difference.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll take a die roll at a chance at winning. Like I
Sure.
really will. Like you kidding me? I'm already winning at life because I'm playing Age of Sigmar, like at an event with like my favorite people in the world that they're all there. Like I'm already winning. I showed up and I won the day like the instant I won, and from there it's just bonus. I hope to walk away. Three the what's that motto that y'all have? Uh,
3 wins or walk home.
yeah, I hope to live to that standard myself. I just putting together just playing, enjoying and stuff like that. I'm like, I'll
Sure.
switch into another gear down the line if I feel like it, but for now I'm winning showing up. And I think a lot of it starts with your mentality and preparation. I think the vast majority of it is mentality and preparation.
And what do you want to accomplish? Maybe you don't want to compete to win the event, and that's fine. Like a lot of times we do, and that's why we prepare like that. But sometimes we just want to show up and drink beers.
Mm-hmm.
Well, your preparation is getting to be heading to the beer store then, right? Like that's your preparation for the event.
Yeah. Yeah, I usually I'm actually drinking New Glarus right now, which is of course
Practicing.
illegal
Good.
to sell outside of the state of Wisconsin. And part of my
Mhm.
tournament prep is buying a case of New Glarus to take,
Yeah.
elsewhere. Indigo Girls asks, how do you feel about? And we kind of touched on this a little bit, but worth a rehash. How do you feel about the current Boogeyman armies slash health of the meta? And I think health of the meta is maybe something we haven't quite touched on, but
Yeah.
so.
The meta is more diverse than it's ever been. The count of armies that are super strong right now is higher than it's ever been in the past.
I mean, we've
What
usually
the,
had 1, 2 armies
yeah,
that were really,
it's like 5 right now.
yeah.
And there's variations. I think what people are unhappy with is that hasn't changed in 12 months. That's where you're getting some unhappiness. Is that these armies seem to be the same ones. We haven't seen nothing's come in to break that, and that has created some aggravation with the new books because I think a lot of the new books are very reasonably written. I know that we just talked about how good the Daughters of Khaine book is, but it's not a Seraphon book.
Right.
It's not like some of these other ones where it's just absolutely everything is amazing. It's strong. It is very strong. Has a lot of play in it. I think there will be events won from it, but it's not an unbeatable book. It's not the Slanesh V1, right? It's not that.
Just to put an arbitrary value on it, I see it at about around a 60%. Like 60% is the upward threshold of what we call the Goldilocks zone of the fat middle, 40 to 60, right? I see it right at that 60%. Personally.
It might be higher, but it's not unreasonable, I think.
Yeah.
Whereas, you have a couple of builds out there right now, whether it was due to point reductions or whether it was just due to changes in the meta or whatever, that end up just being ridiculous. I mean, putting 50 Blight Kings on the table in a Blight Cyst right now, like, okay, I'm a 1-drop army that puts 250 wounds to the 5-up ignore on the table that moves 14 inches. Great. Turn 1, they're on the objective. Turn 2, turn 3.
Old baby hold.
There's no reason to go anywhere. And they actually do damage, too. You get in there, they start beating you up.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a hard problem to solve. There are armies that can solve it. Seraphon with, teleporting Croak and summoning his screen and then dropping the Salamanders by him, or the stand and shoot Skinks, or even the double firing, double Basilicons. I mean, there's crazy stuff they can do, too. There's a lot of... there's a lot of good builds out there. Tzeentch Change Host still a thing. Flamers still rock.
It's weird. Like they did
horrible.
Just enough change to Tzeentch with just enough. Like Seraphon just started to hit, so that like people just looked away from Tzeentch. I'm like, this army's still really good, right?
Still really good. Yeah,
like you guys know, it's like falling out of the boogeyman conversation, and I'm like, this thing is still doing everything that wins at Age of Sigmar right now. It's
Fire Slayers never got bad, by the way.
Yeah.
It's funny. I never understood why they didn't. They never caught on that much in the Midwest. And Daughters were late to catch on in the Midwest as well, which I thought was kind of funny. But Fire Slayers are so good. They're terrifyingly good. The damage output of 20 Berserkers is nuts.
This was one of my great internet hot takes from a year ago. Is if you're not complaining about Fire Slayers right now, you shouldn't be complaining about Petrifex Elite. And like Petrifex Elite got what was coming to it, and Fire Slayers are just over there whistling and twiddling their thumbs.
Well, it's
Like
funny because Fire Slayers actually got a little bit better because when you lost the 30-man unit cap,
they gave
the
you.
negative play experience went away. But what it meant is that you could now take two 20s and then some other stuff rather than two 30s and nothing
Well,
else.
they were
And
incentivized to play the army better because the 130 block was already kind of like suboptimal. You
it's
wanted.
unwieldy, yeah. Or sometimes you would take two, which was nasty, right? But then you can only be in two places. You could now theoretically take three 20s and some stuff.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's a shame that it like I think Vince Venturella did his like little like army aesthetic survey, and I think Fire Slayers was the lowest rated by far. I'm like people just don't like the look of it, so they don't play it. I'm like this is if I showed up. I said a little bit ago because like my playstyle is already like very similar. I like melee grinder, sort of like
Mm-hmm.
pseudo. I like that playstyle. Like I do. See, Ossiarch Bone Reapers. Like I really do like that play style. I'm like, if I like dwarves, I'd be or had the patience to convert it all into undead stuff. The whole like as far as the eye could see, like like you put your 100 hours into Spartans. If I had that patience, I'm like probably playing Fire Slayers as my competitive build right now. Like it's got some weak matchups, but what I'm trying to do on the table goes to that play style. What I'm trying to do on the table, this army does, and it does it better than my Mortek guard. Like
Yep.
I'm like, even with catapult support, like, my catapults are essentially my two catapults are essentially threatening. Depending on the army, usually they're threatening one spot. They're giving me that ranged ability to, like, pluck and stuff like that. I'm like, if I have this churning 3 waves of Fire Slayers, one of them teleporting, I'm like, I'm pretty much accomplishing. And then that's before we even talk about some of, like, the janky shooting builds that you can fit in there.
Yep.
Like that's before we even start talking about some of the Fire Slayers have some fun shooty. I'm like, so yeah, I think it's a cool army. It's weird. One of the regulars in chat gang here, from Germany, apparently they just see
Mm-hmm.
tons of Fire Slayers and German like the German.
It's super common over in Europe in general. Fire Slayers just, and I think it's bigger on the coasts
Mhm.
in the United States as well. So I think it's yeah. I just didn't understand why it didn't quite make it to the Midwest. But yeah, I mean it's a wildly good army.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and Daughters of Khaine was another one where it's like we got buffered from the Daughters of Khaine hate here in Midwest because like Nagash was just being
Right.
single-handedly made like nationally hated by the Midwest scene, which was fun. I showed up in the wake of that. Thank you all. Uh, just like walking up starry-eyed, holding my Nagash, and like everyone's Nagash, and I didn't yet know just the
What we had done.
yeah what you had done to everyone. Y'all and Brendan. Um, no, so I like what your take of just to reset the conversation a little bit. I like your take on like the number of winning armies or just strong armies we see
Mm-hmm.
right now. I don't know. I I personally kind of checked out for the last year, just kind of trying to deal with my
Sure.
situation. I think a lot of people went into like survival mode. Um, so like I just kind of gave the last year a pass. I understand the frustration you're talking about though. As I kind of like awaken from my personal sort of like stasis field. Um, I don't think it. I mean, if 3.0 is around the corner, like people say, the GHB, it's not going to stay that way forever. This too shall pass. The wheel of AOS always turns, always, and I
It
don't
does.
think people can blame. I think last year it had a little bit of a reason for that, like 12 months of stagnation, just a little bit more than other years, and
A
we need
little
to
bit.
have some patience with it. Um, I see. Um, so you talked about solving the meta a little bit. Um, I guess so these if you had advice for somebody kind of seeking to go, maybe they're playing, like they're playing at their LGS net right now, they haven't ventured to a
Mm-hmm.
tournament, or they've been grinding a couple tournaments here and there, but they're looking to take their game to that next level, or they're looking to get a little bit more competitive. What's some like
Mm-hmm.
sort of general advice you have?
We'll understand what the meta is right now and what you're going to be facing in a tournament. Um, this is something I've been doing for 20 years, but when I'm afraid of an army, I buy the book. Go buy the book, start reading it. Knowledge is power, right? Start understanding what these other armies do, what some of the weaknesses are. Go try to build lists of that army. See what you can't get into that list. See what the limitations are. Start understanding what doesn't fit. That no, not everything is going to get in there, or if it does, it can't do X, Y, and Z, right? I think that's a great place to start because then that educates you on do you actually need to change your army? And not like your allegiance, like assuming that you're going to stay with your book, but like maybe your list is fine, you just need more practice, or maybe there's something major missing in your list, like maybe you just need to, rebuild it, or it's missing a key piece that suddenly changes it. That can kind of give you the intelligence for that, and then go and reassess that list, of course, with your goals in mind, like kind of like we talked earlier, and then practice with it. I think I see a lot of people that will change a list after one game or after two games, and it's hard to find the time to do 10 games the list. I get that, but maybe at least give it 2 or 3 before you change anything in it. Like take it out there, see what it does, because like your first game, you're trying to figure out what are your distances, what are your bubbles, what does it do. It's going to take time. I think the other thing I learned from other players is that like when you write a list, don't just try to get all the toys in there, but like what does this army do? Like what's your plan? Like turn one is are you pushing out your screens, you're bubbling out, you're controlling the board, and then you're using ranged weapons to push out on them? Are you trying to jump in an alpha strike? Are you going to sit in the corner and force them to come to you and cause problems? Like what's your rough game plan with the army? Like, and it can't just be buff this unit up and throw it forward, because that's not really a plan. I went through that phase. I did that. And it worked somewhat well, but not that well. So it's just, I think just practice is great, but also have a plan for what your list does. And then once you have that plan, go execute it over and over and over again and try it out and see what it does. And, play more events. Playing on a tournament game is very different than playing a Wednesday night Warhammer game, right? You'll feel a little pressure. If people have played on the top tables or played on stream, man. Anybody that saw my stream game on Honest Wargamer remembers I forgot to deploy one of my hags game 4 against Fire Slayers. One of the most critical pieces of that whole army. I just kind of forgot to put it on the board. Great move, dude. Great move. And that was just like me being out of my own head. And that happens whether or not, even if you're not on stream. You can be on a top table and you're anxious and you don't even realize it because you've got a shot at winning the event, or you've got a shot at going 4-1. And then you start making mistakes you wouldn't normally have, and just becoming almost comfortable with that stress. Even if the stress isn't that bad, like it shouldn't be awful, right? It's a game, but
yeah,
just becoming accustomed and adjusted to it.
My hands still shake. I put a down payment on a house with Magic the Gathering winnings. All right, like I was for a time, and my hands still shake. Like when I'm like doesn't matter what I'm doing. And the thing you talk about getting comfortable with the stress. For me, maybe that means that like my hands don't stop shaking. Like I might always just like I'm an anxious person. I have anxiety. Like I might just always have that. But learning how to like where you get to a point where you have enough reps, like okay, yeah, my tape measure's shaking. I'm playing against someone I haven't like learning to where you get enough reps to where you're not psyching yourself out when you notice your hands shaking. Like that's you might not ever get to a point where you don't have like some nervous tics or some nervous abilities, but you'll get to a point where you have some mental competence and comfortableness with your own sort of being uncomfortable to where you still go through a similar mental process of like do this, make sure I deploy this. Like you get to a point where you're not overthinking it, so that even when your nerves are out there a little bit, you're still going through your winning strategies. You're still going through everything that you normally practice with and you normally know how to do. And that just comes from like having to go to a tournament and having to be uncomfortable and having to get uncomfortable. Most Age of Sigmar players are, again, this community, no bullshit, I think is one of the greatest communities in all of gaming. I've been around gaming my whole life. I've never met a community like the Age of Sigmar community. You hear some boogeyman stories on the internet, and I don't mean boogeyman in terms of boogeyman lists, about like that guys. I haven't encountered a that guy yet, and in about 3 years of tournament play, uh, I've had one bad game I can remember. There were a couple other bad games, but like I don't remember them, so they couldn't have been that bad. There's still in 3 years one, which I think is a pretty good clip. I think that's pretty awesome. You know, you have games where you walk away like, oh man, I could have won that. But in terms of an actual bad experience, like one, that's pretty awesome. Um, and I think that like don't let yourself be intimidated and set some more realistic expectations and then go into it and just do the thing. It's so much fun when you do the thing. Um, Anything else to add on Daughters of Khaine? Because I got a hot burning question for you. Anything else to add on Daughters of Khaine tournament prep or Worlds? Anything we didn't get to? Anything you really
I
wanted
don't
to
think
talk
so. I mean, I think that pretty much kind of covers we went pretty deep on the tournament prep, and it's a fun process. And man, I can't wait to get back to it. I'm ready for some tournaments so I can start start prepping for them. But yeah, I think that covers. I think the Daughters book is a solid one. There's a lot of versatility into it. I mean, there's 24 reviews of it out there to go super deep on it. I think there's a ton of potential there to write some wacky lists that are still very strong. So excited to see what people come up with, because I think the Hagnar build will be good, but I think there's going to be some other gems in there that are going to be real janky and real fun.
Retreat and Charge is so awesome. It's so good. And
especially with Marathi.
Yeah, it's like
so good.
I'm just like I'm looking at that and I'm like, this is tasty. Like I kind of know what I'd be playing.
An entire army of Retreat and Charge. I mean, that's pretty nasty.
Like welcome to the blender, like where your whole army's just swirling around, retreating and charging as you circle around. Will this blend? So it's just like, oh man,
will it blend?
like fucking, like you just where the whole army's in motion just circularly. All right, yeah. So my other question is when are you spearheading the Detroit Warhammer podcast?
I've wanted to do it for a while. It's all talk, no game right now. But work for me has been pretty crazy recently, doing 60, 70-hour weeks right now. But as things start calming down a little bit, I want to get that project going at some point. I don't know what it'll actually be, or even really what the format is. People seem to just like following our stupid banter online sometimes, so we might see if we can make it into a program of some kind.
Right on. I know. Sean's mentioned you wanted to get it going here for a while, so
it'd be fun. I like talking Warhammer. I think a lot of other people do too, and it's fun taking a competitive look at a game. There's a lot of good competitive podcasts out there, but it's fun to have an excuse to jump on and get somebody else's view on a competitive landscape and understand how they think through things.
Well, I mean, even if people have similar takes or similar reads of like the battletome, you still find that like you find an audience that like resonates with how you say it, or
for sure,
they like your perspective, or
yeah,
you so I don't think there's ever enough Warhammer content, and people are going to find what they like, and you're going to kind of find your audience, so it's useful. Competitive Warhammer podcasts, the ones that I'm like, these are like legit, are there's a lot fewer of like competitive podcasts than there are like stuff like my show, where mine's just an excuse to talk to somebody about Warhammer, and we only loosely usually talk about Warhammer. We usually talk about everything else. I do it that way because there's plenty of people talking about actual Warhammers calling themselves Warhammer podcasts. That's my secret. Not actually talk about Warhammer. But I mean, I think a competitive perspective is pretty useful, and I think it helps. With the aim to get people less intimidated by competitive, to show that competitive players are people too. Stuff like that, where you just the more we all.
It's not about ruining your opponent's play experience, right? It's just a different way of looking at the game. Like, I want to try to see how many games I can win. You're gonna still play even. You're gonna play smart. You're gonna want to have a fun game. Like, you don't want to ruin anybody's weekend. Like, don't be a jerk. Right. But at the same time, I don't think it's a bad thing to say, you know what, I want to do the best I can at this event, and I want to strive for excellence, and if that means taking home a trophy, that'd be great. I don't think that's a bad thing, so long as you're being a good sport about it and you're respecting the event and all that, which everybody seems to.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I mean that expectations and stuff like that goes a long way. You know, what's the expectation when you go to a tournament? You're gonna play people who want to win that tournament, and I think that
Sure.
that's important to get out the way. But then from there, it's like, even like even having like a casual like outlook on the game, and like you know, I'm like I'm right between beer and pretzels and competitive. Like I have my competitive
Sure.
lean. Again, I'm like a recovering competitive player. I'm just like I don't know when I want to.
The itch will come back.
I don't know, like, and that's the thing I fear because I know, man, I played Blood Bowl. This was kind of like what I did to kind of stay in
Hmm.
Warhammer adjacent and stay like polished and stuff like that. Salty Meph is a real son of a bitch. Like he comes out in Blood Bowl, and I'm like, no, no, we don't want League of Legends Mephisto here. We don't want that guy. We don't want like Magic the Gathering. Like we went and played drunken D&D, which was like beer pong. It was 20 cups, and your beer pong was basically for your die rolls on the D20. So you had like 1 through 20 on the thing, right? And then so that was how we rolled. I got hammered, showed up to a side event, completely hammered, ruined ruined 3 guys in a row. Just ruined them, and I was the loud braggart, like just obnoxious drunk, like, oh, Merfolk's supposed to win this matchup. That really sucked for you. Like that guy. I never want that Mephisto to come out. I don't think he will, but that like, man, that was being salty is part of the Blood Bowl experience, apparently. Yeah. Got a really, really important question here from Nuke Doctor. Where is
Oh
your
boy.
combat gauge?
It's in my backpack. That was a big miss. Good point, Sean. Man, yeah, that was me coming straight from work. That was yeah, that must be why I felt off all night. There hasn't been the weight, you know.
Yeah, you got to wear the combat gauge at all
Oh
times.
yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, right on. See, that's another tip for getting better at competitive Warhammer. You have a combat gauge that you wear around, so
And
you're
it's got
always
to be the old one that's like way too heavy, so if you drop it on your foot, it actually might break a toe.
yeah,
Like that's the key. Is it's got to be so heavy that it's really not usable,
yeah.
and it has the string going through it that you can't remove, so that there's really no good use for it.
Yeah, yeah. I used that thing because I thought it was super swag in my first tournament until I realized that that cord gets in the way of freaking everything
Yep.
when you're trying to like actually use it
Or if
practically.
you try to wear it and you lean over your models, it looks like a bowling ball and just like knocks them all over.
Yeah.
The number of times I've done that during deployment and just like kind of looked up at my opponent and been just like, well, we're gonna restart that.
All right, man. Any final thoughts, Age of Sigmar or otherwise, you want to get off your chest? This is your
I
final
don't think
digital
so, man.
soapbox moment.
No, it's been a good chat. Thanks for having me. It's always fun chatting Warhammer, and maybe as the broad idea of a podcast comes up here, that I'll ping in. We can figure out how to chat about that again if that ever becomes a real thing.
See, I've lost 86 times at podcasting, so I'm like the you know how you just lose a bunch of games and then you go and you win stuff in Warhammer. That's what I'm doing at podcasting is just losing every time I put on a show, but I'm getting better and better and better at it. So maybe by the time you get yours together, I'll be useful.
All right,
But
I'll
no,
hit you up with
almost
some for some tips.
yeah, but almost certainly yeah. I can tell you all the things that not to do via my experience, and then
Hey,
help you out.
that's a great start.
Yeah, right on, man. All right, chat gang. I see Snitbag dropping 1,000 RDP. Remind everyone, chat gang ain't nothing to mess with. I am, of course, Magical Mephisto. We've been talking with Jake LaCure and talking competitive AOS. I hope you enjoyed the show. Chat gang, you're the show within the show. The reason we do this thing, drink your milk, pay your taxes, and I'll see you next time. Look at that sign off. You gotta.
So smooth.